Good evening, and thank you for tuning in, everyone. My name is Alyssa Expósito, and on behalf of all of us at the locally based, independently owned bookstore Books and Books and the Books and Books Literary Foundation in Miami, Florida, it is my pleasure to welcome you to a virtual evening with Stephanie Burt to discuss her new book, Super Gay Poems, LGBTQIA+ Poetry After Stonewall, published over by our friends at Harvard Press. This event is sponsored by the Books and Books Literary Foundation, the non-for-profit organization that sustains Books and Books as a community hub and expands its mission. The foundation brings authors, books, and community literary events directly to those that don't have access to these things. If you'd like to support the foundation's work or learn more, please visit our website over at booksandbooks.com. And now to introduce Stephanie Burt. Stephanie Burt is a poet, a literary critic, and a professor at Harvard University with 9 published books, including 2 critical books and 3 poetry collections. Her essay collection, Close Calls with Nonsense, was a finalist for the National Critics Circle Award. Her other works include We Are Mermaids, Advice from the Lights, The Poem Is You, 60 Contemporary American Poems and How to Read Them, The Art of the Sonnet, Something Understood, Essays and Poetry for Helen Vendler, The Forms of Youth, Adolescence and 20th Century Poetry, Parallel Play, Randall Jarrell on W.H. Auden and Randall Jarrell and His Age. Her writing has appeared in the New York Times Book Review, the London Review of Books, the Times Literary Supplement, The Believer, and the Boston Review. For those of you tuning in, just a quick reminder that throughout this evening's broadcast, you could post questions in the chat. We will be having a Q&A towards the end. For those who do not have a copy of the book, you could order your copy of Super Gay Poems, LGBTQIA+ Poetry After Stonewall from Books and Books and support independent bookstores nationwide. There's a green button below that takes you straight to the link, so please purchase. And now, without further ado, I'd like to welcome Stephanie to the virtual stage.
Hi. I'm virtually on stage.
You are. Welcome, Stephanie. How are you?
Happy to be here and excited that people are taking an interest in various modern and contemporary and super gay poems.
Same. Thank you so much for joining us tonight to discuss your book. It is just as vibrant and moving as you are, I have to say. So, yeah.
Wait, how vibrant and moving am I?
Incredibly so. I mean, just look at your bio, right? And all the work that you've done. And I also want to take this time too to thank everyone for tuning in and joining us this evening. Whether you have your tea, your wine, your annotated copy, or just your curiosity, I hope you guys enjoy. And with that, let's get into it, Stephanie. I know that you wanted to start with a read of a poem from the book.
So
and
yeah, I try to read different poems for different events and not to, lean on the same intro again and again. And I haven't read this one in a while, and it's one that it's a poet, and it's a poem that is reasonably well known among older lesbians in England.
Amazing.
And you'll see why.
Right.
And I love it so much. This is a poet who unfortunately passed a number of years ago, but we'll talk about her if you want. It is a poem called 7301, 7,301. And the poet is U as in universal, A as in amethyst, U.A. Fanthorpe, Fanthorp, 7301. Learning to read you 20 years ago over the pub lunch cheese and onion rolls. Learning you eat raw onions. Learning your taste for obscurity. How you encode teachers and classrooms as the hands, the shop floor. Learning to hide the sudden, shining, naked looks of love. And thinking the rest of our lives, doing perfectly ordinary things together. riding in buses, walking in Sainsbury's, sitting in pubs eating cheese and onion rolls. All those tomorrows now, 20 years after, we've had 7,300 of them. And if your arithmetic's right and our luck, we may fairly reckon on 7,300 more.
Mm.
I hold them crammed in my arms, colossal crops of shining tomorrows that may never happen, but may they? Still learning to read you, to hear what it is you're saying, to master the code. So, yeah,
That was incredible. Gave me a
thank
little,
you.
yeah.
And you may see from the cheese and onion rolls or from the fact that they shop at a grocer called Sainsbury's that this is an English poet. And it is a poem that seems to match very closely the details of Fanthorpe's real life, very long term partnership with someone she met when they were both teachers at the same girls' school in England in the early 70s, Rosie Bailey.
It kind of just happened.
That's how it happened. And they both left teaching so they could be together and so that Fanthorpe could take a less intellectually demanding job and devote more time to writing poetry. And her
What I,
first job, what?
yeah, continue. Sorry, I didn't mean to cut
Yeah,
you off.
Fanthorpe's first job was in some ways more demanding. She was the administrative assistant, if I have this correct. She answered the phone at a mental health facility.
Yes,
And
I think I've
so
read.
her first book was all about the mental health facility. And then as she expanded her range, she wrote very clearly and beautifully about sort of beloved topics in Englishness. She even wrote a series of Christmas poems and poems about rural England. And she and Rosie Bailey were just together and they shared a household and everyone knew. But it was England and it was the late 70s and it was the 80s and it was the early 90s and they were not out. And the love poems were carefully non-gender specific.
Yeah, I was going to say that this poem isn't explicitly queer. Right?
Mm-hmm.
There's
And yet,
something, and yet there's something beautifully subversive about the poem, and like its call to what I found to be like tender, and there's also a power of being seen within it.
yeah.
So how do you think that this aligns with what I guess some people call a queer poetic gaze,
Well, there
perhaps?
is no single queer poetic gaze, right? There are queer poets, and each poet that who's worth reading has their own way of seeing the world. This is a poet who really wants to enjoy the most ordinary, literally bland, right? Cheese and onion rolls,
Hmm.
bits of her town and village and suburban life, and just to be together with her lover and to create, as Wallace Stevens said in another connection, a room in which being there together is enough.
Mm.
And so she's trying to imagine that, and she's trying to present a sense of that reliability and that mutuality and that way that a long term, really trusted romantic partner can give you something nobody else can give you. And
There's like,
that is, I think, for Fanthorpe, it's not something that is distinctively queer or that sets queer partnerships apart from straight or straight passing partnerships. If you are someone who gets all hot and bothered about homonormativity and insists that queer people should not imitate straight people in any aspect of our lives, then Fanthorpe is not going to be the poet for you.
mhm.
But also, you'll have other problems.
Yeah,
And the book has other poets who insisted that queer people need to blow everything up and start afresh, which is an understandable
yeah,
sentiment. But for Fanthorpe, you just want to find your sweetie and settle down. And one thing that does read as queer in that poem, once you look for it, is the sense of mutuality.
hmm
This is a poem that takes for granted that their relationship is not only loving and trustworthy, but sort of by default equal. They don't even have to work to make it equal. They're not
Safe
working
in some regard.
against what?
Safe in some regard.
Yeah, yeah. Um, there's not really a danger that one of them would dominate the other or exercise economic control over the other. They just go to pubs and hold hands and have sandwiches and they go
And also,
shopping together.
yeah.
And every day it could be awesome and you can just count them.
And I'm so excited that you started with this and we could deep dive more into her and other poets. But let's start to speak about super gay poems and the origin
Mhm.
story of super gay.
Okay.
So, to begin, how would you describe super gay poems to someone hearing the title for the first time, but who may not yet know about queer poetry, how it sounds like, how it may appear across a page?
Okay. A lot of poets worth reading have written poems over the last uh, 60 years. A lot of them are LGBTQ plus. Many of the LGBTQ plus poets wrote some of their best poems about queer experiences, trying to embody in language aspects of being queer or trans. We found 51 of those poems that I like a lot. And I wrote an essay about how to read each one and why it matters and
Mm.
what it's doing and where it belongs in international queer history. And then we took all 51 poems and 51 essays and gave it an introduction and an index and put it in this thing that, has pieces of cardboard on either end and you can go to Books and Books and buy it.
Yeah, I when I first saw the advanced copy of it, I
Mhm.
remember because the title's so delightfully bold, super gay
Mm,
poems, and
thank
I
you.
remember seeing it and picking it up, and I'm like, "Yes, please, that's so fun." And then when you obviously you crack it open, you realize that this is more academic forward. It is very heavily research based. It has a beautiful analysis of each of these poems. But how did you, for those of you who haven't read the book, haven't read your intro, how did you land on this title? Like,
I
what
mean,
does
it just
super
the
gay
book
symbol?
just needed to be called that. It needed to get attention, and it's accurate, and they're super. I read a lot of superhero comics, so I think about
Okay,
super.
getting to
Uh,
know
I wasn't
Stephanie.
gonna call it. I mean, I could have called it uh, uncanny gay poems. Or exceptional gay poems. If you read X-Men comics, by the way, the really good one right now is Exceptional X-Men, written by Eve Ewing. Yes, the educational sociologist Eve Ewing.
Wow.
So I could have called it, um, the uncanny gay poems, or Earth's mightiest gay poems. But I thought I'd just go with super gay poems, and I wanted to get to show my excitement even more strongly by calling it super gay poems! Exclamation point! Exclamation point! Exclamation point! And that was actually what we were calling it for most of the period when I was sending parts of it to the press as I finished it. And then you'll know this as a bookstore people, as a bookstore person. Um, Bookscan hates non-alphanumeric characters.
Yeah,
I was told if you put a question mark or a pound sign or an ampersand in the title of your book, Bookscan will hate you
which is
and
wild.
bookstore employees will hate you.
Yeah.
So we took the exclamation points out and it became super gay poems.
And do you believe that the tone and the intention, you've nailed it, like that you find that your readers will
I
grasp?
hope so. I mean, I think they're super. I think they're great. I think that people
They
approach
are.
poetry as an art form with an excessive degree of solemnity or apprehension. And, poetry is a name for an art form. It's putting language into patterns that work on us both through their emotions and through their ideas and through the way that those patterns sound.
Mhm.
And the idea that it's all poetry is supposed to be challenging or difficult or serious or academic is just as silly as the idea that all music is supposed to be serious or challenging or silly or academic.
Yeah, I'm
Um,
glad.
there's a lot of different kinds of poems, and there's a lot of different kinds of queer people. And there's a lot of different kinds of poems about queer experience that I like enough to write about them.
And I think this ties into, and I've told you right before we met up on stage that I'm a fan of poetry. I love poetry and I read a lot of poetry. I've never taken like a formal poetry class or have any formal background in it. However, I
Mhm.
wasn't daunted when I approached this book because
Thank
it
you.
was because I was able to, and I'm not sure if this was taboo. I didn't read the whole thing
You're
chronologically.
not supposed to.
Awesome. Thank you. I'm glad because I wanted to see the juxtaposition or comparison of starting with Frank O'Hara and then reading Cyborg, um,
Mhm.
that last at the end, and seeing how language also transcended and seeing also how that question and answering
Mhm.
evolved over time.
Yeah.
So your book is structured with both poems and your essays. So
Mhm.
can you talk about the importance of the way you blended your personal experience, poetic, and your academic experience in this way?
So I have written about my personal experience in poems and in prose, but it's not here. This doesn't tell you, where I went to high school or, where, what zip codes my partners live in or what
Yeah.
my favorite shoes are. That I put those in poems by me. They're not for here. But my sensibility, I hope, comes through in some of the essays that I write, which are ways into and frames for these poems. And I hope that the essays help people enjoy the poems, and the essays, maybe if they work, also give people ways to learn and dive into queer sensibilities and queer history, even apart from the poems to which they're attached. Some of the essays are about tone and emotion
Hmm.
and what it's like to miss someone for the first time or what it's like to meet someone and fall into bed with them or how sexy humor works in the essay on D.A. Powell, for example,
Hmm.
um, or the queer worth of gaudiness and self-display in the essay on Mark Doty poem. Some of the essays are in part explanations of how forms work. Why is this rhyme there?
I am
Why is
entirely.
this not a ball of chaos?
Yeah, I learned a lot through your essays from
Yeah.
your perspective. And I guess we were talking about these themes of like missing someone and discovery. Were there certain themes of grief, joy,
Yeah.
resistance that surprised you when they emerged, when you crossed certain poets or poems?
Um, there were surprises and there were themes that run throughout English language queer cultural history.
Can you
I don't
speak a
know
little?
if any of the big themes were surprising. The surprises were more poets who I discovered by widening my net and casting my net in various spaces I hadn't gone fishing often. But I did try to bring out some themes. There is a history to queer poetry,
Mhm,
just like there's a history to queer people. There is a moment of liberation, of post Stonewall. Let's be as out as we can and celebrate the creation of communities and also celebrate sexiness, especially among gay men.
mhm,
And there is a sense, I found a sense in the poetry of the 70s that poems by and about and for gay men and poems by and about and for lesbians were moving in the same direction,
okay.
but often in separate places, moving toward the same emotional registers of let's figure out what pride looks like, but with some literary self segregation. And then, of course, in the 80s and early 90s, you get the HIV/AIDS crisis, which is not over,
No.
but which shaped the poetry being written in the United States and elsewhere in the 80s and early 90s, when no matter how much money you had or where you lived, HIV was probably going to kill you sooner or later.
Yeah, this takes me to The Worrying by
Yeah,
Paul.
the Palmanet poem. Yeah, and when being a an artist in queer spaces in the United States and a lot of other places in those years was seeing your friends die and die and die and die and die and seeing your partners die and die and die a lot and constantly being part of mourning ceremonies and caregiving ceremonies and being a caregiver for people who were 30 or 40 or 50 who looked 80 or 90. And that was an atmosphere of constant mourning and also constant rage because a lot of that didn't have to happen, right? A lot of that was actually the Reagan administration saying, ha ha, the queers are dying. We don't care.
Yeah, I was reading about Roger's grave.
Yeah.
And that to me, I was like, what a last FU, right? But also how poignant and true, which it
Yeah. Roger
reads.
being the boyfriend of Paul Monette,
Yeah.
who wrote Monette wrote his best poems about Roger's illness and death.
And I was really taken by that. Died of homophobia slash murdered by his government.
Yeah.
Um, and
And yeah, reading Paul
even
Monette
there's
just
some
took me
pride in
back.
that, right? Like even
What?
that, even in that statement, there's pride in that
Oh,
because
oh, so much that being angry is a way not to be resigned, is a way not to give up. And given where we are now, and given physically where you are,
Mhm.
I realize that the government of your state that you live in, which I don't live in, has been actively trying to kill us for a couple of years now.
Yeah.
It's
Still at
new
the
to
rate.
me, for the federal government to be trying to kill us again, like not by neglect, but kind of by design.
Yeah. Intention,
Yeah,
actually.
yeah, they actually want us to die. Is the way that it looks. So reading and writing about Paul Monette in I'm trying to remember when the book went to bed. And I think that, yeah, the book went to bed after November 2024. I think it went to bed in like December.
Okay.
So reading the poems of grief and rage from the era of HIV/AIDS literature in the United States took me back in a way that was both enraging and empowering, and especially the Paul Monette poem. But then other stuff happens, right? There are begin to be poems of queer parenthood.
Mhm.
There begin to be poems of non-binary identity and trans identity and gender transition. And there are trans people in the 1970s, but there aren't, and there are trans memoirs, but there aren't commercially published and circulated poems that you'd want to pay close aesthetic attention to that are explicitly about being trans.
Okay. So let's speak about the poems and the selections and the poets that you've chosen for the
Sure.
book. It features a
Mhm.
diverse range,
I hope so.
and it does, yeah. What were some of
Mhm.
the criteria that guided your selections? Were there poets that you had to include no matter what? And was it very difficult for you to narrow
Yeah, it
it?
was difficult. I'm not going to tell you who the poet number 52 and 53
Yeah, yeah,
were, who was the last one in, first one out, like you do with basketball. I'm not, no, I can't tell you that. But it was quite hard to narrow it down, and it was exhilarating to try to widen things, to look for more, and to look at more.
What was your, I guess, basis?
Well, I wanted poems that excited me and that fascinated me, and that I was pretty sure I had 2,500 words worth of things to say about.
Yeah.
Um, And I wanted variety, not just chronologically, the 70s and the 80s and last week, not just demographically, right? You want poets who speak Spanish at home and poets who speak South Asian languages at home and Afro diasporic poets and poets with disabilities and other kinds of obvious demographic variety, but also stylistic and tonal variety. Terse poets, effusive poets, joyful poets, angry poets, poets using relatively traditional forms, and poets who were really going for conversational free verse clarity, and poets who were making an absolute mess, whose poems look like chaos on first encounter. Um, Short lines, long lines, poets who seem to be coming from traditions. Sorry, this is a moving screen. I'm going to try to give
Course.
it more stability. Sorry. Um, Poets who seem to be coming from traditions of performance whose poems could almost be improvised.
Okay.
Poets who seemed very into creating chiseled, compressed objects, emotional and stylistic diversity, which were just as important to me as demographic diversity and also international diversity. I really tried to get all those things in.
And you could
And there were
definitely
things left out, right? There's more than
hardest
51
part is
kinds of queer
edit,
people.
right? Is the shortening, the condensing of it. And I'm wondering, when you're in this process and you're devising all of these 51 poems and then you're analyzing them, was there any poet or poem this time around when you read the final product that perhaps like took you by surprise in any kind of way when you reread it, your analysis of
Hmm.
it? Did you
Poems where I go back and look at the poem and say, wow,
like, hit
that's
you differently? Like,
yes.
can you talk
Yes, there
about
were. Um, I think the Judy Grahn poem, which comes quite early,
that?
which is about the beginnings of self-conscious, not lesbian identity, but lesbian pride. The way in which Grahn sees lesbian pride developing as a direct reaction to homophobia and invisibility. The way that that poem is a poem of sarcasm and anger. I
Hmm.
think I hadn't seen the role that sarcasm played for Grahn when I first wrote about that poem. Um, and it's another good example. I hadn't seen the seriousness of the engagement with Christianity in D.A. Powell's poem about carpentry and a carpenter's apprentice and being a carpenter's apprentice and wanting to get nailed and hammered by your savior.
Hmm.
And Powell does this all the time. Quite a lot of Powell's work, especially in his third and fourth books, Chronic and Cocktails, have to do with sexy gay Jesus and sex between men as a way of being open to the true salvation. And, conversely, homophobia and prudery as ways of cutting yourself off from the human communion. And I hadn't seen initially just how thoroughly the humor in Doug Powell's poem about carpentry
That's a theme that I
was.
see throughout the whole book too. There's a lot of humor and
I hope so.
funniness. Yeah.
Yeah, well, I mean, queer lives are funny, right?
Yeah.
Like we when we have to justify ourselves to straight people, which sometimes we still have to do, we make it very serious. It's either you have to let your kid be trans or they're going to jump off a bridge, or don't you want us to be able to solemnize our vows and be just as seriously devoted to one another as, grandma and grandpa?
Hmm.
And sometimes I say those things to straight people too. They're not wrong. But also there's just so much goofiness in the way that we don't fit straight people's expectations and cis people's expectations. There's so much queer joy that is just, what the hell is going on here? Where did all those feathers come from?
And that's brings me to another question regarding queerness and joy. There's so much
Mhm.
also joy as well as pain and humor in this collection. Can you talk about joy as a queer and poetic act?
Yeah. Um, you sometimes see, pins and bumper stickers that say, trans joy is an act of resistance. And trans joy would be, by definition, joyful and trans, even if it were not an act of resistance. But it
Mhm.
is, because in order to be ourselves, and I'm speaking as a binary trans, middle-aged white lady in New England. Other people have their own demographics, but so often our paths to self-acceptance and the paths we see authority figures and adults in our lives when we're young take to self-acceptance
Mhm.
move from self-hatred and denial to resentment. Why do I have to be like this? Is there
A
some way to
different
not be
stage
like
of grief
this?
almost.
What?
It's almost like different stages of grief in a way.
Yeah, and we're told to let cishet parents grieve the loss of the kid that they thought they had.
Instead of
Um,
celebrate.
yeah. And sometimes, I mean, their feelings are their feelings, and if you're, on this stream and your cishet parents' journey to accepting you included a stage of grief, whatever, those are their feelings. You don't have to be there for that. Um, they can talk to their cishet friends and then come back when they're ready to be nice to you.
Yeah.
But we are so often told to grieve who we are, that other people are grieving who we are, or that we are to be put up with or tolerated.
Yeah,
And
tolerance. Such the
yeah,
word.
tolerance. It's too bad that I have to be trans. It's unfortunate, but since I can't help it and I was born this way, I may as well have basic civil rights. And that is not, I mean,
It's
it's
not
better
it.
than not having civil rights, but yikes. Like, no one wants to live that way. What we want is not tolerance. What we want is acceptance and joy and the full range of experience we can have, which includes many experiences that we can share with, name your favorite cishet poet, Seamus Heaney, whoever. Um, and also some feelings that seem to me distinctively queer. There are some states of mind that seem to me expressed adequately only in queer writing. And
That's what I found to be the most compelling, and I think the most compelling about queer writing, and specifically reading this arc of historical poetry
mm-hmm,
after
mm-hmm,
Stonewall, was that these are a collection of poems that, in queerness and the language that surrounds it, it seems to be, for me, like a question and an answer. Like it is the question of one's identity juxtaposed to the certainty that who I am and who I want to discover myself to be isn't traditional.
yeah,
And it's a way to have to create paths that are living out and also kept within.
mm-hmm,
So it's like this pull, which it reminds me of one of your poems, We Are Mermaids, the last line, you can live with your doubt, that's why it's yours.
mm-hmm.
That I absolutely like. It gives me goosebumps just reading it again and
Oh,
again because I'm like, it is a reclaiming of agency, autonomy, and it is something. Um, it brought me also to
sorry.
reading. What
I'm just
happened?
I'm crying. I'm crying a little bit. I'm
Oh,
actually crying because it's not it's not usual. Sorry, I'll be fine. Um realizing that people who are part of reading and appreciating and uh, extending the life of the lit crit books that I write and put together, in which I have some confidence. I'm pretty sure Adrian Rich is great. I'm pretty
Yeah.
sure Chen Chen is a wonderful poet. People should read him.
Yes.
You can't have the same feeling about the poems that you yourself write unless you have a very unusual kind of sociopathy.
Yeah.
Um, you can't know if you wrote it, but you can
Yeah.
hope, right? You can
Yeah.
hypothesize. And the fact that you're also enjoying poems that I wrote, that's
Yeah.
thank you.
It when I read that, I was like, yes, this is exactly the experience, like in just one line. And it was exactly what I was trying to encapsulate with my question because it brought me to um, the poem Nights of 1962, The River, Merchant's Wife by Mary.
Oh, the Marilyn Hacker poem. Yeah.
And she's referring
Hmm.
to the signs at the bar. And like how I interpret it was there's signs that say from Jack to Queen, walk like a man. And she writes too cool to giggle at the double entendre. It's as if there is a language. And like to me, it's like almost like there's a language that she knows and we know as queer people, yet we don't really share with the world and we do, but it's in a way very I feel like, and it's something I'm trying to put the words to, but how have you found that language and being queer and in your queerness has evolved over time, like your sense of identity as well?
How has my language for my own queerness evolved?
Like
Oh,
being
sure.
queer, like how is it like being queer, how has your association to language evolved over time, especially being a poet and an academic?
Wow. Thank you for asking that deep and challenging question. I mean, I was one of these hyperverbal weird kids, and I'm still kind of that. And I feel like I'm in a lot of ways constituted by language. I just kind of move through the world in language
The
with,
language is
you know,
so beautiful in that it gives us so much, but it's also so limiting.
yeah. And part of reading poems and part of writing poems and part of working with poems is you want I want there to be language that is adequate to that can adequately describe and represent and convey and maybe even a little bit explain or preserve and also improve the experiences that I have.
Mhm.
I want a poem that is adequate to the experience of having somebody cut you off in traffic and then realizing that the person who cut you off in traffic is driving a 20-year-old Volvo with a T for T bumper sticker. I just made that up.
Yeah, yeah,
But
yeah.
that's the kind of thing that could happen around here, right? I want a poem adequate to the experience of realizing that you have been finding excuses to text this person you just met, whose pronouns you don't know yet, because you
Mm,
kind of thought they were super cute and want to get to know them. I want a poem adequate to the experience of introducing your partners to your kids and your friends' kids and saying, and this is my metamor.
mhm,
Um, I want a poem adequate to the discovery that your aunt, who you looked up to when you were really little, um, was and is as gay as it is possible to be.
mhm.
And no one at Thanksgiving noticed or mentioned
Notice.
it.
Yeah.
Um, I haven't been cut off in traffic by a T for T Volvo driver yet. I may have been that driver, unfortunately. I hope not. But like those others are very close to experiences that I've had. And we want to see those experiences represented in language. We want language for what it feels like when something happens. We want language for what it feels like when something happens to us. And we want language for what it feels like when something happens to someone else that will never happen to us, either allegorical or literal. Sometimes it turns out, sometimes the best way to describe um, having sometimes the best way to describe a body opening, bizarre, life shattering sexual experience is to describe whose bits went where. And sometimes the best way to describe that is to imagine being kidnapped by a talking swan. Some of you know what poem I'm talking about. I'm being
Yeah.
somewhat polemical about that poem, and it's not especially queer. But, science fiction and fantasy in poetry and in prose and in comics and extremely non-naturalistic figurative language and weird ass patterns are sometimes the best way to do justice to real experience. And I'm happy to be able to work with those and sometimes create them, speaking as a mermaid,
Yeah.
and represent them in some of the poems that are super gay in the book that we're, celebrating and
Yeah.
hoping people come away with a copy of. Even though some of the poems in there are also really almost journalistic in their description of a particular place and time, like the Marilyn Hacker poem you mentioned, which
Yes.
tells you exactly what it was like to be at the Sea Colony, famous New York lesbian bar, in 1962 and be only sort of out to yourself while you're married to Samuel R. Delaney.
Yeah. 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 And that to me was really fascinating about this book is not only am I getting the artistry and obviously this sentiment and emotion, but then you're getting this amazing analysis and explanation of what you are drawing from it. So, how would you encourage people that maybe feel intimidated by poetry to start reading it and even writing it?
So, I mean, the flip answer is wherever you want. The slightly less flip answer is that if you don't want to read the essays about individual poems and super gay poems, I did write a book called Don't Read Poetry, a book about how to read poems that is specifically for that purpose. And the, TLDR, if you don't want to buy and read another book of my lit crit because your time is valuable, the TLDR is different poets and different poems do different things. Nobody likes all the poems. Most poems represent some way of feeling that someone can have. Some poems want you to feel like you feel that way too. Other poems want you to feel like you just met someone who's had experiences you haven't had and they're going to show it to you.
Hmm.
Some poems want you to just go, "Oh, that was amazing. That was quite a technical feat. You just came up
Yeah.
with 30 rhymes for squirrel in the course of presenting a human emotion." Some poems want to be puzzles you can solve, and some poems want to bring people together around shared wisdom. And those are, for me, the major categories of what poems do. But, other people would come up with other categories. Different poems do different things. Different people like different poems. If you want to read some poems and you read Emily Dickinson and you're like, these are too short, they're kind of puzzling. I know they're supposed to be great, but they're not for me. Maybe you want to be reading Adrian Rich or Langston Hughes or George Herbert. And there's just a lot of poems out there, just as there's a lot of music out there. And you don't if you want to find songs that you like,
You have to.
figure out whose recommendations you trust and just find a radio station or a playlist or a critic you like and follow the trail created by work that you like.
And with that, what do you hope readers, and especially younger readers, queer readers, For those that are just coming into their identity and
Hmm.
voice, or those who are older coming into their
Yeah.
identity and voice, what is
Hmm.
something that you want them to take away from this book?
Acceptance, joy, delight in language, maybe a couple new favorite poets, and also maybe a sense of our history, because there's a lot of history in here
The
too.
truth, yeah. I was telling you before, I felt like I was taking a class with you almost, which is
Thank
great
you. I
because
hope my students feel as good as you did.
I hope
It
they do
was
too.
it it it, it did surprise me, not as I wrote the book, but as I've sort of gone out in the world and promoted the book a little bit and met people who were reading it, how much people don't know.
I
Um,
have to say that I didn't know a lot either reading this, so I felt like I was also getting a historical, um, education and
yeah,
lesson here,
and
and
that's what it's for. We've all got things we don't know, and God knows there's a lot that I learned by writing the book. Like I didn't know the history of queer communities in Singapore. I just knew that Singapore had
queer
some
communities.
wonderful queer poets, and
Yeah,
I was gonna read as many as I could find and see what I liked. And now I know the history of the queer community in Singapore, which moves very fast. It's like they speed ran about 40 years of queer liberation in the US. They went from in the 90s, you can't be out, to in a lot of ways, of course you can.
yeah. It was, almost like a polar opposite of that. All right, Stephanie, so we have about 10 minutes. Time
Okay.
flew by so fast,
Do
but
we
I would
have
like to
reader questions?
we're gonna check the chat. I'll check the chat. I don't see any so far, but we are encouraging folks. So before then, we could do a little rapid fire fun round just to get to know you a little bit more. I love to do this. All right, so I'm gonna ask you 4 questions and you could answer first thing that comes to mind. All right?
Uh-huh.
All
I'm going to
right.
answer Joe Martini's question first, which is in the chat.
Okay.
It depends on the poet. Some poets really want you to know their lives first. Some don't care. That's the answer.
And the question, everyone, was how should aspects of a poet's identity inform our understanding of their work? What is the relationship between a poem's speaker and the poet?
Okay, we can go back to rapid fire now if you want.
All right, let's do it. All right, so first question, favorite punctuation mark?
Ooh, quotation mark.
Last poem that made you cry?
Oh, my friend Catherine Rockwood has two poems in that appeared in a journal yesterday. One of which was a couplet on its own, and one of which was about having a crush on somebody with a tattoo who's gardening, and they made me cry.
Love that. Um, a line from any poem that lives rent free in your head?
Ooh, uh,
I know it's a little challenging, this one.
that's so there's so
I have one that
I mean
repeatedly, but they passed away.
I want to give you one that I want people to chase down instead of the first ones that pop in. Breathe on me still, star sister.
Ooh. Can you drop who's that by?
Yeah, that's Randall Jarrell's The Meteorite, which is a I think 7-line love poem um that Jarrell wrote for his second wife. And it is a beautiful extended metaphor about stars and meteorites and having love that's written in the stars. And that was a straight passing couple, but if you read the work, you'll see that a lot of us have various ideas about what was really going on.
Awesome. And then last one,
It's,
favorite
it's
Taylor
trans poetry. I'll just tell you, it's trans poetry.
Swift. Last one, favorite Taylor Swift song.
That changes from day to day, but my normal answers are nothing new and I can do it with a broken heart.
Awesome. All right. And now for some closing reflections, Stephanie, what is something that you've learned writing this book that you didn't expect?
Um, I've been talking very seriously about how to read poems and how these poems work. So I'm going to give you something a bit lighter, but that's real.
Okay.
There are 51 poets in this book. From the time that I selected the poems and started writing about them to the time the book hit bookstore shelves, I believe that 7 of them changed their pronouns.
Oh,
So the
that's
lesson
exciting.
there is that you can try out new ways of being seen and new words for yourself and new ways of living at any time, and no one can stop you.
I feel like that tied in with my last question for you, which was if there was one feeling, thought, or permission slip to give to your readers walking away with super gay poems, what would it be?
Try it. Try it out. Try
Amazing.
things.
Stephanie, I appreciate you so, so much tonight. Thank you for your generosity, for your insight, and for your
I
poetry.
appreciate you, Alyssa, and I want to pronounce your name correctly, Alyssa Exposito. Is it
Exposito.
Exposito? Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you. Um,
Yeah.
Thank you so much for being here and doing this and supporting the book and supporting queer writing at Books and Books and Books and Books. Do
And
people
book.
say that? I want to
Well,
come to the
you
store.
know, our yes, please come visit. Our owner would love you for that because he always says that books and books and books and books and books.
I'm
So
I'm I'm hoping that if, as certain bookstores around here have done, there are second or third locations.
yeah,
That if there's a second location, it's called Books and Books and
books
Books,
and
and
books.
then
You're onto something. You're onto
wait,
something.
is there a second location you're gonna call Books and Books and
We,
Books?
no, we do have several locations, but there's still books and books. But that would be
Mm,
funny if it was books and books and books, books and books and books and books. um,
Fox and
but
Socks, Fox and Socks and Box and Books.
ooh, yes, that's tongue twister.
Yeah.
But
But no, I want to. I mean, let's find an excuse for me to do an in store. Let's make it
yes,
happen.
let's do an open mic poetry night. Let's get you to the book fair. But I want to really thank you and for reminding all of us that to be super gay is not just about identity. It's about imagination. It's about visibility and the
Mhm.
freedom to tell our stories out loud.
Yeah.
That's a very
Yeah.
powerful thing,
Yeah.
especially in
And they
this
don't
time.
even have to be stories. They can be other kinds of representations. They can be made up allegorical stories. They can be songs that don't tell stories. They can be representations in language of whatever's going on with you. Try it.
Yeah. And I want to thank everyone also who tuned in tonight. Thank you for being part of our vibrant literary and queer as ever community. We hope you guys leave here feeling seen, inspired, and maybe just a little bit more in love with the written word. If you
Oh,
haven't yet grabbed a book, yep, please grab a copy of Super Gay Poems from Books and Books. Support indie, please read queer, and keep showing up for books that move all of us. I hope you guys buy the book. We have the green tab in below. And if you haven't yet, please grab a copy. And until next time, folks, I hope you keep reading. I hope we keep feeling. And as always, stay super.
thank you for having me. Thank you. Okay. I hope we get to meet in person.
Of
Okay.
course, I would love that. Have a good night, everyone.